excited to see such a good crowd today. There's a few other things going on in town, so we're glad you're all able to make it. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a little bit of the history before People's Savings Bank. I can't shoot off the cuff like Eric can, so I've got my notes. He doesn't have anything notice. So, as most of you probably know, Wellsburg was incorporated in 1896. So after this time is when the building boom really began. And in 1898, on May 1st, is when our first bank opened. George Wells, who everybody probably knows, was our president. John C. Lush was vice president. Charles Biedersheimer was cashier. And building of the new building, which is where the insurance office is up here with Dylan, began in March, and it opened for business on May 1st.
And if you haven't been in there, swing in and ask him to see the safe. Is it still in there? It's all operational and everything. And he'll show you. Yeah, right. That's right. So he'll show you too. So that's kind of cool to do. Let's see.
So George was the founder of our town, of course, and he owned thousands of acres here in the middle of Shiloh and Melrose townships. And Mr. Lush was a packlet, and he operated elevators and had a livestock business. And then Charles Biedersheimer was Lush's nephew, actually, and a businessman from Rhinebeck. In September of 1902, the Bank of Wellsburg reported that they had a new adding machine, quote, which is a marvel in adding up columns of figures. All that is necessary for the operator to do is to press the button.
What is the name of that bank? What's the name of that bank?
That was Wellsburg Savings Bank. It was Bank of Wellsburg originally in 1898.
Bank of Wellsburg.
Yep. And then in June of 1904, papers were filed with the state of Iowa for the corporation to transact business as a savings bank. So at that time, the name was changed to Wellsburg Savings Bank. And the first board of directors were George Wells, J.C. Lush, Charles Biedersheimer, and Jacob Peters and John Jayden joined the force at that point. And in February of 1908, 48 safety deposit boxes were installed. And much like the ones today, there had to be a master key and then they had their own. In 1909, we got our second bank that operated at the same time as Wellsburg Savings Bank, and that was the Farmers and Merchants Savings Bank of Wellsburg. Chris Neeson was president, Joe Newell was vice president, Klaus Primus cashier, and Herm Frericks assistant cashier. In April of 1921, it was published that both banks would close during the noon hour, 12 till 1, due to the frequent daylight robberies by hold-up men at other banks in the state. In July of 1921, a new clock was installed on the corner of the building. You can see this clock in one of the pictures that's running on the television back there in our slideshow. And it was reported that it had Westminster chimes, which chimed every quarter hour. This clock was operated by electricity from a master clock inside the bank and was reported to keep perfect time. Though this nearly 7 foot tall by 2.5 foot wide exterior clock no longer exists, at least that I know of, the internal clock which controlled it sits in Eric's office in the bank.
So that, come on in and take a peek at it too. There's some document, use it loosely because it's just somebody's, pencil, but from 1919, which ties into these dates. And so up until just this week, when you and I were talking, I had no idea why that clock, because it doesn't look like your traditional grandfather clock, right, at all. There's a lot of wires in it, there's a lot of different levers and things like that. Well, just put it together that was the clock that ended up achieving that. I didn't. So it was kind of fun putting those things together a little bit. So it sat on the inside and was wired, and that's how they controlled it on outside. Cool.
So in 1931, the Wellsburg Savings Bank and the Farmers and Merchants Banks consolidated to create the first state bank. Merging the interests of these two banks was a general trend over the country for fewer and bigger banks. This new bank had resources in excess of $500,000. Chris Neeson was president, Dick Clausen, Vice President, H.J. Frericks, Vice President, L.A. Minor, Assistant Cashier, and G.H. Curtis was Cashier. During the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, the Banking Act of 1933, which created the FDIC, which is our Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which I'm sure we're all recognize that, it was signed by President Roosevelt on June 16, 1933, with a limit of $2,500. In 1935, he signed the Banking Act of 1935 into law, which made the FDIC's deposit insurance program a permanent part of the U.S. financial system. And in 2008, it was signed into law by President George W. Bush, which temporarily increased the FDIC basic deposit insurance coverage to $250,000, which is what I think we're all familiar with today. And so then with that, I think I've covered up to 1934, 1933-ish, when I think Eric's going to take over and tell us about the People's Savings Bank and its progress through the last 90 years.
So I'm going to confuse things a little bit here too, because I just want to bring Cleves into the mix of this as well, because that is a part of the story of People's Savings Bank too. So I actually, I'll pass this around here, but Security Savings Bank of Cleves. So there's an article on the back table right back there that we can tie Cleves back to 1912. That's as far back as we've been able to find. And then I have these articles of incorporation are from 1924. And it's really neat. Obviously, they're not original signatures, right? But it's the copies of everything, and it has the original directors. It has the capital stock, which was $15,000 at the time, and then just some other information. There were 7 directors that were involved in it, and this is a document that they would have utilized with the state and had on record with the state. And so, so we have the directors listed. There's 7 of them. And so W.H. Sober, D.J. Peters, J.J. Ludeman, S. Jansen, H.A. Jaspers, E. Boyinga. Is that right? Did I say that right? And then I should know this, but A.I.K.E.S. ICUS. Okay, there we go. And so then it has the positions, and so ICUS, Ludeman, Soper, and Peters were all different positions. So the president of the bank at the time was D.J. Peters. Vice president was W.H. Soper. Cashier was J.J. Ludeman, and the assistant cashier was ICUS. And so it's just, it was 34 when the banks combined. They basically moved charter, and then there was Cleves and the bank here in town in 1934. And so then that's really when People's Savings Bank in 1934 or 37 was when the name actually became. So there's roots back that go farther than that, but we've stuck with 90 years or 50 years or on the 4s every 10. So I'll leave that so you can look at that. It's just neat to see the information that's in it. Basically, what we did is we had a lot of information. Jolene, Eileen, they helped keep all of the information over the years. We've got 2 former employees here. There might even be more that I don't know, but to be fair, if it wasn't for you guys, a lot of this, because my generation unfortunately doesn't value some of this history like we probably should, and so it was cool. I remember you at different times, or Jolene, or Diane, who said, "Hey, let's go down," and boy, cleaning out the basement and seeing the old typewriters, seeing the old check printers back there. There's a couple of them that I don't even have any idea what they did, but they do say, some of them say on there. So we have those pieces that are on that back table right there, and then there's a couple more in the admin building, right to the north of the bank. We just have them sitting up on windowsills. And then there's another piece that goes back to the early 1900s that came out of that bank there, and they moved it down to this one in the 50s, because it was in the 60s when the bank was built here in town. They moved this safe, which we just moved again a year ago, but it sat in the same spot for 60-some years, and then probably sat in the same spot there for 60-some years. And what's funny is there's an article, where did that one go? Okay, so there's a small table, right? Eileen, you had that. There's an article there that talks about in the 60s when they moved it, and there was an employee that it dropped on their toe, and it caused all kinds of, So my best guess, when we tried one time and we were unsuccessful, so then we gathered the troops again and we were able to get that safe moved. My best guess is it's somewhere around 600 pounds. The safe is that tall. So I don't know exactly what it's made out of, but go see it, because the inside and the mechanicals, we've got the crank on it to get it wound back out and open, but we leave that shut because that door is so heavy as well. We don't want anybody to get hurt. But the inside, where you can see just the mechanicals of the lock and everything, they are pristine. So it's pretty cool. So take a look at that. And then the best we could trace that back to was early 1900s, which would have been tied to the bank on the corner there at some point. So we still have it, and up until, was it just 2 years, 3 years ago? Or so, 4 maybe? Yeah, where we used it on a regular basis still. So pretty neat. We had over 100 years probably out of this safe, and it stuck with the same thing. So another thing that's really interesting to me over the years, there's an article this is from 1973, so we're jumping quite a ways here, but when I first started at the bank in 2013, 2015 is really when I started to kind of pay attention to the history and started to really learn about some of that. What's interesting to me is that there has been 1 or 2 directors from the beginning that has stayed in the same family since the beginning of the bank. We've had a couple. There's been a Jaspers, or there's been a Lindemann, or there's been somebody over all these years that has been associated with the bank. That's extremely unique. What is extremely unique about your bank is that there's over 300 individual shareholders. Okay, so it's widely held. You don't see, there are very, very few. I was at a convention. Actually, it was for Ava, she got a scholarship, but it was a banking convention, and I was talking to a couple people asking them, hey, how many widely held banks do you think still exist? I haven't got the official answer yet, but I'm talking to the IBA about it, because I'm interested. I would venture a guess that they're out of the 270 banks that still exist in the state of Iowa, we're probably down to a couple dozen that look like what People's Savings Banks looks like. So it's as widely held as it is. There are banks all over the state that are owned by a family or 2 or 3 that have long, over 100 years history. Hardin County Savings Bank is the best example that I can think of locally. It's been in a couple families since it started in the late 1800s. So they're going to put 150 actually here shortly. To do it this way is an absolute credit to the commitment and the contribution that everybody here within Grundy County, Wellsburg, Cleves, has just committed. They've made a commitment to the bank, to the community many years ago, and it's still going. I think that's pretty cool. So 1973, there were 8 banks in Grundy County. Okay. What's interesting is Lincoln Savings Bank, Grundy National, People's Savings Bank, and Farmer Savings out of Beeman are the only ones still that exist today as they did then. Okay? Otherwise, there's been a merger, there's been an acquisition, there's been a sale, there's been whatever that's happened. But you go back to the beginning, early 70s, many banks, there's 4 of them that are still standing in the same general organization that they were then. So I think that's great, and it's a tribute to all the families that ultimately ended up starting this thing over the years. And then all the buy-in that has just occurred. You don't have 300 individual shareholders and not a single individual with over 5% ownership in the bank. There's some families that maybe push 10, 15, but generally, and as an individual, nobody over 5%. That's very rare. We were able to, this was about 10 years ago, we just were looking at a couple things. We were able to tie the family lines. We went 5 generations deep in the family lines, and we were able to tie it down to from over 300 shareholders to 135. So, you could say that there's 135 families then, I guess would be the way to think about that, through different generations, and we tied it, that's what we got it tied down to. The other thing that's really interesting is that the ownership of this bank, 10 years ago, you've heard me say it, but 10 years ago I would have said that 80% of the ownership of People's Savings Banks lives within 10 miles of Wellsburg. Today I would say it's more like low 70s, but it's still extremely high. But that changes, right? As generations come and go, ownership, kids, whatever, that changes, and so they end up losing that personal touch with it. And so that's a unique challenge that we get to face over the next probably 20 years. But none of us are getting any younger, and so you end up having to deal with those situations as family members end up doing their planning. So I wanted to give you just an overall look as to what the bank did look like, what it does look like today from an ownership perspective, and then from the 70s to today, what it looks like as well. I'll share with you real quick. People say Savings Bank in Wellsburg at the time was, at the time was a $9 million, $9.4 million bank. Okay. So today, 50 years later, we are a $175 million bank. 10 years ago, we were about a $95 million bank. And so there's been the one thing that I have been able to just consistently tie back to is that there's just continued investment by community members, but also the bank back into our area. And so that's just been, it's neat to see what that annualized growth number would be. I could figure it out if you gave me a few minutes, but it's pretty significant. But there's others that have done it as well. Lincoln Savings has grown a great deal as well, and so has GNB. So it's neat to see. So this would be over here as well. I wanted to just real quick on the Cleves Bank, this article, some of you would find interesting. So if you know some of the history on the bank in Cleves there, they basically, they tore the old bank down and built a new one on the same block, okay? this tells me, I do not come from a generation that understands that they used to use salvage lumber to do new construction projects, right? I mean, we have Menards now, and everybody just goes and buys it, and then you just tear it down. I'm not saying that's right by any means. I think this is actually really neat, but when I was reading this article, this would be back from, well, it was this one was the 60s, so this one was the 50s. And when I was reading this, the new office is being constructed. Did I lose it? It's okay. There we go. The new office was being constructed with lumber salvaged from the general store building and will feature a brick exterior. Anderson Bierman Construction of Appleton and Wellsburg is the general contractor of the building, which was to be completed in March. So it's just neat seeing that, and I guess the piece of that really struck out to me, and again, this is not it's certainly a generational thing, but that they salvaged the lumber. So you can see that in that picture as well, so take a peek at that when you can. And then I'm going to go to even farther back. So, do either of you two remember these at all? Never got, okay. So these go, I didn't think so. Okay, I was going to be surprised if you said yes. But there's numbers on all of these, okay? And so if you go way, way back, this is what they worked with to create checks, to create some of the money instruments that they had back in the day. So you can take a peek at that as well. When I'm done, it's just some of the history that you don't realize how things actually got done, and how labor intensive, even in a bank, right? My hands are pretty soft, but there's still a labor-intensive piece of it, but it was a fine labor skills. It wasn't rough by any means. So that's another piece. Then this one, you've seen this before, yeah. Okay, so this is a monthly mortgage payment statement. So, now I just carry my phone around, and if I need to do any math at all, I just will pull something up on my phone, and either a calculator or some app that has all the information in it, right? Okay, so this is, best I can tell, this is late 70s, early 80s. Okay, so not super old, but it gives you an idea of when we were using things like this to do just basic general math. The other piece of this that I think you will all appreciate, that I chuckle a little bit, the interest rate, so I told you late 70s, early 80s, so the interest rate range in here was high 7, so it's north of 7.5, okay, nothing lower than that. And then it peaked out at, which this actually surprised me a little bit too, that it wasn't a bigger gap. We get up into 14, it gets to 16%. 16%. So, to be fair, in my banking career now, it's over 20 years, rates for me have always been single digits. Somewhere in there. Now, today, we're seeing some loans done at 10 or 11%, which is funny because I've turned into the older banker now, which it was never that way for a long time, but it's getting to be more that way now. And so the new, you know who I'm talking about, but the new younger employees that we have at the bank, you talk double-digit interest. That's just foreign. There's like no way. But I do remember in the late 90s, and it was the first time that I was ever paying attention. I was at GMAC Mortgage in Waterloo, and they were talking about all prime and all the Fed funds rates and the rate cuts. There was a time in the late 90s or the 2000s that that was the closest up until what we experienced 3 or 4 years ago to the as dramatic of interest rate rises as we saw. And so otherwise it would have been back in the 80s when everything rose up where it did and then back down. So this would have been utilized to quickly grab rates, grab principal, and then figure out what principal and interest payments would have been and create an amortization schedule out of it as well. So anyway, it was in a lot of cases. Now there are a couple on the left. There are some older calculators that can get utilized there too, but look a lot different than what I have on my desk still. But that would have been obviously utilized as well, but this is replacing. Just as now my phone replaces, all of these things. Or the computer is doing it now. If we think about a week and a day ago, Friday, we woke up Friday and what was going on? I was in Okoboji for my daughter's thing, and I wake up and realize that computers don't work pretty much anywhere in the world. And so technology is a good thing. Most of the time. That's a great way to say it, yes. Most of the time. And so, so when we go from, we have 3 banks today, okay, so 3 branches, you know this, but we have Dyke, we have our bank in Wellsburg, and then we still have bank in Cleves. To be fair, would we expand today? Don't be surprised if you end up hearing about something like that over the next year or two. We're looking for opportunities like that, but it has to be the right thing at the right time and all of that. So maybe it'll end up being a little more than that, but we'll see. But so if I go back to the 80s now, 1988, the holding company was established. So PSD Corp was established in the late 80s. Okay, and so at that point in time, it consisted of the bank here and the bank in Cleves. Didn't own anything else outside of that. And then in 1992, they purchased First State Bank up in Sumner, which we owned until 2020, and then we sold the bank in Sumner. In 1999, we purchased the bank in Denver, Denver Savings Bank. Denver Savings Bank's been around since 1902, exclusively in Denver, Iowa. We've never gone outside of that until July 1st, when they opened a branch in Waverly. So one thing that I know you deep within here, you understand and know this, but I do fairly regularly have people that'll be in our office talking, and it's like they're invested in our bank in Wellsburg. Yes, absolutely. But also, don't forget, if you're a shareholder, you also own a bank in Denver, and it's a $425 million organization. So it all started here. The corporation is here. It's not gone far, and it won't go far from here. But it is far greater and has far greater impact than what we just had experienced here. So there were a number of presidents that came through from, how many, can you guess off the top of your head, how many presidents would you have worked for? Yeah. Yep. Leland Lou, Bernard Harms. Is that what been it?
I didn't work for him.
Okay.
And then after him, Gary James was
Yep.
temporarily.
Yep.
And then Mel Fry.
Jim
Jim
Anderson.
Anderson.
And then Rich.
Rich.
Okay. So, and that goes back, so Leland Lou, Bernard Harms, sorry. Who did you all say there?
Bernard Harms, Mel Fry,
Yeah, there you go.
Mel Fry,
Yep.
You
Okay,
Jim Anderson.
yep. So Leland Luke, okay, Bernard Harms, Mel Fry, James Anderson. Was Gary James before? He was in between Rich and Jim Anderson.
After Jim.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
before Rich.
So there was a short time that Gary James was in there as well, interim, and then it was Rich Fox, and then myself, and that covers a lot of years. Come again? Yep, and we're probably 50s, 60s, somewhere in there, 60s and later. So over the last, we covered the last 60 years or so. You're a handful of presidents that have been here. I don't know the tenure of all of those. I know Rich was here for about 16 years. Jim was not here very long. Gary was an interim that was short. Worked for the bank for a long time, but interim in that role. And then I'm not exactly sure how long those others, but there's been continuity, and that's a testament to still existing. Generally, it's hard to get something really going if there isn't that continuity over the years, and so there's been that as well. So today, currently, there are 6 board of directors, plus myself. Our president and CEO of Denver Savings Bank is a director for our bank as well. So it's Brian Sheridan, myself would be the 2 that would be internal, and then Seth Schrader, Harris Ryder, Tony Doolard, and then Alan Jaspers would be the current board of directors for the bank. And then the holding company would, Laura Folkerts, so that same group, and then Laura Folkerts, who is an attorney out of Nashville, and sits on Denver's board. She would be on the holding company. And then Jeff Schumacher would be the other one. And Jeff Schumacher, so Schumacher Elevator in Denver. So if you're at hotels and you get in the elevator and you see the sign that says Schumacher, they came out of Denver, Iowa. They have a lot of them all across the country. So anyway, Jeff is a part of that as well. So it's everybody on our bank board here plus those 2. That would be outside. I want this to be, so what questions would you have that I could try to answer? Go ahead.
This is way before your time.
Yep, well,
I found a sale bill from 1938 where it says it's a public sale of the remaining assets of the First State Bank of Wellsburg. So did the First State Bank become People's Savings Bank?
so
Tammy answered a lot of questions about this sale.
I have been, and I'll try to speak really loud. So
This,
So
this sale,
I've been told both.
see, this sale bill is so interesting because it says they're selling the remaining interest of that bank.
Yep.
But then it says it's also including assets purchased from the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Wellsburg and assets purchased from the Wellsburg Savings Bank. So what got me to wonder is, we have 3 banks in town at one time?
No.
Sandy answered that when you read what
So
you read.
2 to 1.
Yeah, and then, so then,
And my gut tells me that was more of a merger, right?
well, this was just a public, this is a sale.
Yeah, but
But they were gonna sell, it says the remaining assets of the First State that must have then become people's savings bank.
That's the story that I've been told the most.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there's another question though that I would have and I don't know when this was, but I was looking forward to this because I was hoping I'd be able to get the answer. At one point in time, if I had to guess, I would say in the 60s or 70s maybe, there was a takeover attempt. Does anybody know, or tell me about it? Was it in the 80s, 70s? When was it? And I know how this, right? I get it. I know how it works. There's a few that get a little disgruntled, and so they're going to try to get something going on their own and talk to current shareholders. So, yes, okay. So it was in the 80s then. Okay. All right. So that's a piece of the history, though, and it's good, right? Because it's not always fun, and everybody doesn't always get along. So it's a part of the history, and it has been told to me a number of different times. I just couldn't remember the time frame of it. So yes, holding company was established. There were some other operational agreements that were made, and so yes, it happens. It does. In banking, that is something that if you look back through history. There's been successful ones and there's been not successful ones. This one was not, but there have been successful attempts as well. So that's just a part of all of it. Other questions? Yeah.
So this sale bill that I have, 1938, that First State Bank, I thought all the banks had closed in about 1934 because of the Depression. How did this bank still survive? Was that a result of the closing of the two?
I think it was a result of it.
So those two other banks that talks about their assets, this First State Bank bought them after the Depression, closing them. Okay, that makes sense.
There were winners and losers that ended up coming through that, really. And I mean, if you think of, we have a few examples of that, right around here that did make it all the way through. And maybe there was a name change, or maybe there was some capital injections and things like that just to solidify them. Maybe there was a merger that happened, but there were certainly winners and losers through that period of time for sure. And even here in Wellsburg, there was definitely a shakeup that occurred because there were two that came down to one, and it's been one ever since.
And it's interesting to know too, that before the Depression, there was an article that said there was like 15 or 20 banks in Grundy County. There was 15 or 20 banks in Grundy County, and that went down to, I think it was 6 or 7 or something like that.
So 70s, it would have been 7 or 8. Yep. And then to what we have today.
So yeah, when Farmers and Merchants and the bank and Wellsburg Savings merged, that became First State Bank. And there's an article as well that I found in the newspaper that said people needed to come in and sign a paper so that they could transfer all of their assets into the new People's Savings Bank.
So the 4 remaining in Grundy County that still have the same roots that they had. I mean, there's 2 banks in Dyke. There's ours and Fidelity is there. Well, Fidelity is one point. It's a really, really big bank, and it's owned. It's not local. So the 4 that do remain have legitimate. It's either family. There's one that is a few families. Farmer Savings is probably the closest structure that is similar to People's Savings Bank as far as ownership goes. And then Lincoln obviously is completely different than what it used to be. And then G&B even. I mean, they've grown a lot as well, and a lot of branches, and even the ownership. It doesn't have there is local ownership for sure, but it isn't quite as concentrated as it once was. Like ours, it's extremely, extremely unique to have the ownership concentration that we do here, and always have had in this bank. So, what else? What other questions?
You talked about the directors and how they stayed in family and went down generations. I would say that a lot of the stockholders too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, like when I worked with them, they would be like, oh, I'm the grandchild of somebody that was in the bank when it first started or whatever. I'm like, I will never sell that stock because my great grandparents said to me, you value that and you keep it, and it's just, that stayed in the family.
Yeah. So that, this would have been, 7 years ago or so, that it was one of, well, actually, the largest individual shareholder of the bank. And she passed away. And it was just interesting because all of a sudden my door gets dark and there's an individual standing there that I had never met. And he says, I'm so-and-so and I'm from Indiana. And I want to sit down and learn about this inheritance that I just received. So obviously he was here at one point in time, but it was very short-lived. But he got these shares, he and his sister, and you know what? They both own them today. They aren't going to let it go, and that's just, it's cool. He said to me, he sat in front of me that day and said, I was told to not sell this stuff. So anyway, it doesn't always happen that way, just like farm ground. We could probably all in here relate to farm ground, easiest, right? It'll stay for a while in the family, but eventually it can end up rolling outside of it, unfortunately. And so, yeah, it's similar to that.
Go ahead.
So, who remembers the counter checks? Probably everybody in this room. I remember going up to the store and Mom would forget her checkbook at home and she'd say, oh, I need a check pad from People's Savings Bank. So she'd just make it out and scribble her name on there and that was it. And what happened to those checks when they got to the bank? Eileen, and you probably worked with some of those, I would imagine?
Well, we had put it on their account. One person did that, and then another one did the other one. So one would have the customer would have the sheet that we would give them, and the other one we keep in the bank. That was the only.
But you made out the account just by a signature.
It was just they were all in there alphabetical, so that's the only way we did it.
No. Not. I would say that I can still recognize a lot of signatures at a company.
Sure, right. You still recognize a lot of those, yeah. And so that would be one thing that I would say, and I'll refrain from saying good or bad, but the amount of times a money instrument was handled, so like if you back up how many other years, when you would bring a check in, the amount of times that check got handled before it was actually, the transaction was actually done and balanced and the bank was balanced. Unbelievable the amount of times it was handled that many years ago. Today, so I chuckle at you couldn't read them all. We still deal with that today, except the thing we deal with today is you stick it in this thing that we refer to as a toaster, and if the toaster can't read it, well then we gotta figure out what's, because then you have to do something manual and actually key it in, right, to the computer. Otherwise, it comes it's dumped in, it gets ran, and they'll pull it out of there, put it back in their work, and it doesn't necessarily get touched again unless things don't balance. And then we'll go back through it and make sure that if it balances, it's not gonna get touched again. It's just really interesting. It went from being handled multiple times throughout the day to really now, once that transaction's done right here, if everything goes smooth. And so Friday, it didn't go smooth. Those transactions weren't going to be, so there's conversations going of, boy, can't we just go back to the way things used to be done? Because we'd still be able to do business. So anyway, yeah. What other questions might be out there?
How many employees do you have now?
So give or take 25. So, and that's been fairly, over the last 10 years, and then I'll go back a little farther just from what I was able to find through some other records. That's been fairly 20-ish over the last 10 plus years. Prior to me, when Dyke came on, obviously they have a group that's fairly just works over there, dedicated to there. But overall, it would be in the teens. If you go back into, you probably, well, actually, in there is in that book, right, the 3-ring binder right back there, there is a, it was the 50th anniversary celebration, and it was at Cleves, it was out in Hardin City, and this would have been in '84, and that's where they got together, and so in those pictures, I would say there was teens, and then it's just come up from there some, but the idea, and it doesn't always work this way, but generally roughly around 8 million in assets per employee is kind of how we, like for efficiency, that's kind of where we would like to see it. So, yeah, that's just one of the markers that we look at. The insurance, no, that's another piece that was brought on, what, is it 70s, 80s?
Early 90s, I would
Okay,
say.
okay. And so that is still a piece of it owned by the bank. So Wellsburg Insurance, which also operates in Dyke, as well. They service Cleves as well too, obviously, but that's a part of it. Again, wholly owned by the bank, and so it rolls through the bank's financials annually as well. Go ahead.
So, that's one thing that I keep getting asked now yet is, how come there's so many people in the bank? There's so much staff, and that kind of relates to that question. And so just back when I started, there was just a couple tellers. And you would think with the electronic world that you would need less people, but if you take a loan now, when I first started doing loans, I could do the loan, the person could sit across from me, I would do the loan, I could put it right on the computer, a person would sign it, and out the door we'd go in for pay. Now it's, somebody takes the application, somebody has to get the loan ready, somebody else has to put it into the computer, somebody else has to check it. Now it gets scanned into the system, so you don't have all the paperwork. So somebody else has to make sure that that scanning went in right, so we can find it back later. And it just takes so much, but it's regulations that have made that. It's not the workforce, it's the regulations that have caused that. I can remember before when you did a time certificate and you didn't have a APY, which is an annual percentage yield, you would type out that time certificate and you had a rate, and that's the way it was. So in, I would say, the early 90s, we had to learn about annual percentage yield. And there too, that's another thing that, it was so easy just to type that out, but regulations changed it, and I can't remember the regulation, I think it's DD or something. But anyway, that all changed that, so you had to now tell everybody what the APY was. And so people say, oh, you got so many employees, it takes that many more now than it ever did before, so just.
That's a really good point with so I chuckle at a lot of the regulatory climate that exists out there today. Appropriate, yes. Are there elements of it that are certainly overkill, especially in a small bank in rural Iowa? There is, for sure. And that's one thing that we look at. And we're trying to maximize on our staff as much as we can, because we sat there and I mentioned earlier efficiency, okay, but then because of all the dual and triple and quadruple and controls that we need to have in place today, a lot of people wear a lot of hats. So an example with the holding company that was established when it was, with one thing that the holding company has allowed us to do is we actually have, and in those numbers that I gave you, we share 6 employees that exist at our holding company level. And so they consist of our information technology, so IT, so computer, they keep us safe. And that's for both banks. And then we have compliance up there, which is creates the whole regulatory environment that we're in. So we have 2 there, and then we have 2 for HR and marketing. And so we share those between both banks. And what we're doing is we're trying to capture economies of scale and just maintain that efficiency, because in the name of efficiencies and technology and doing things better and quicker and faster, the reality is that because of the regulatory environment we're in, we have more steps, and so more people are ending up ultimately touching, especially on the loan side. It's gotten really heavy. And so yes, there's the app, and then somebody has to create the docs, and then somebody's going to close it, and then somebody else is going to check it to make sure it's all right, and then it's got to be checked after it gets scanned as well. So it's getting touched a lot. So that is a good comment. Anything else? Committed, loyal, dedicated. So this community, and I've talked to a couple other things recently. I think what's just a common thread across this community is just committed, loyal, passionate people. They care about their neighbors, they care about their community, they care about the things that have been here, and they care about the history, which is great. Because there's a lot of areas in our world today that are trying to push history away, and they're trying to push rural away, but there's more good that comes out, and this is my personal opinion, there's more good that comes out of rural than there is in most of the other places that are out there. So we need to continue to stay, committed, loyal, and just continue to value what it is that we have. And it's hard. It's extremely difficult to face some of the things that we're facing today, being the size that we are. And so we try to just provide the best service that we can, and then impact the community in as good of a way as we can, whether that's through jobs, whether that's through interest rates, or whether that's through giving back. So we really value that a lot. And it appears, some of you could attest to this better than I, that that's been one of the common threads over the 90 years that the bank has been around. So anyway, so thank you for that. Good. Anything else? Last call? We're going to leave some of this up here for a little bit. And so, was there Oh, yeah. Yep, so we've got some items here on this table, and there's, I mean, some of this goes back to 1925, some of it goes back to 34, and then there's just periodic, some of that's the 50s and 60s and 70s on that table. So there's just, tried to get something kind of from every decade through that you can take a look at and see, so, yeah.
Thank you, Eric.